Sophie worked at the small restaurant Le Petit Paris, a modest establishment in the heart of Marseille. The place was frequented by regular customers and tourists looking for a simple and affordable meal. She loved what she did, always smiling and attentive, even when the place was busy and the manager, Mr. Laurent, was impatient. That night, a light rain fell over the city, making the streets dark and wet. Just before closing time, a young man entered the restaurant. His clothes were soaked, a worn-out hoodie covered his head, and his old sneakers left wet marks on the floor. The other customers cast curious glances, and one of the waiters whispered something to another, laughing mockingly. Sophie, however, didn't hesitate. She grabbed a menu and approached the table where the young man had sat. "Good evening. Can I help you?" He looked up and gave her a small smile. "Good evening. I just wanted something warm." Sophie noticed that he looked tired, maybe even hungry. Without caring about his appearance, she gently asked, "How about some French onion soup? It's the house specialty." The young man nodded and thanked her. Sophie went to the kitchen, but as she passed by the counter, the manager called her with an irritated look. "What are you doing?" "Serving a customer," she replied, not understanding the question. "Customer? Look at him. He's dressed like a beggar. We can't just let anyone in here." Sophie felt a wave of indignation, but she held back. "He just wants a meal. It's not fair to judge him by his appearance," Mr. Laurent scoffed. "I don't want trouble. He might scare away the other customers. Finish quickly and ask him to leave." Sophie ignored the manager's words and proceeded with the order. Soon she brought the soup to the young man, who received it with a sincere smile. "Thank you. You were the only one who treated me well since I walked in." "I'm just doing my job," she replied kindly. He ate slowly, savoring each spoonful as if it were the best thing he had ever tasted. When he finished, he asked for the bill. Sophie handed it to him, and he pulled out some bills from his pocket, leaving a generous tip. As he stood up and left, Sophie didn't notice that the manager had been watching from a distance, arms crossed and a stern expression on his face. The moment the door closed, he approached her. "You're fired." She widened her eyes. "What? Why?" "I warned you. I don't want that kind of people here. You disobeyed me. Pack your things and leave." Sophie was stunned. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She tried to argue, but he ignored her. A tightness grew in her chest as she said goodbye to her co-workers and walked out of the restaurant, now unemployed. That night, she wandered aimlessly, feeling the cold of injustice much more than the cold of the rain still falling. The next morning, Sophie woke up feeling the weight of reality. Le Petit Paris had been her second home for years, and now she was unemployed for doing something she believed was right. She sighed, trying not to let discouragement take over. She needed to find another opportunity. She got dressed and left early, walking through the streets of Marseille in search of work. She went from cafe to cafe, from bistro to bistro, but the answers were always the same. "We're fully staffed at the moment," or "maybe next month." Discouragement began to creep in, but she refused to give up. Meanwhile, back at Le Petit Paris, business carried on as usual until the restaurant door opened and the young man from the previous night walked in. He was dressed differently now, wearing a stylish jacket and a sports cap. Some customers immediately recognized the face behind the humble disguise from the night before. It was Kylian Mbappé, the French football star. A buzz spread through the restaurant. Some waiters exchanged glances, surprised. The manager, Mr. Laurent, who had fired Sophie, rushed over to personally greet him with a wide smile. "Mr. Mbappé, what an honor to have you here. How can I help you?" Mbappé looked around, as if searching for someone. "Where's the waitress from yesterday?" The manager's smile faltered for a second. "Oh, Sophie? She doesn't work here anymore." The player frowned. "Why not?" The manager hesitated but realized he had no choice but to tell the truth. "She disobeyed my orders by serving an unsuitable customer." Mbappé's expression grew serious. He crossed his arms, staring at the man. "Unsuitable customer?" The manager swallowed hard. Well, you didn't look very presentable yesterday. We didn't know who you were. Mbappé let out a dry laugh. So that means if someone looks humble, you treat them badly? Laurent tried to explain himself, but the player didn't want to hear it. He turned around and walked out of the restaurant, leaving everyone speechless. Mbappé wasn't the type to forget a good deed. As he drove through the streets of Marseille, he thought about Sophie. She had treated him with respect when no one else had. She had lost her job for something that should be a basic principle, serving all customers well. That's when he had an idea. He picked up his phone and made a few calls. He knew business people in the restaurant industry who could help turn his plan into reality. Then he set out to find Sophie. Sophie was sitting in a small cafe, sipping tea to warm her hands. Her money was limited, so she needed to save as much as possible until she found another job. That's when she heard someone calling her name. Sophie? She looked up and was surprised to see the young man she had helped the night before. But this time he wasn't wearing a worn-out hoodie. He was well-dressed and his face was unmistakable. Sophie blinked, stunned. You're Kylian Mbappé, he completed with a smile. Her face grew warm. She couldn't believe she had served soup to one of the world's greatest football players without realizing it. I had no idea. And that was the best part, he replied. You treated me like any other customer without knowing who I was. She smiled, still unsure of what to say. Then, he sat across from her and got straight to the point. I heard you were fired for serving me. That's unacceptable. Sophie shrugged. Life goes on. I won't give up. Mbappé liked that answer. And you won't have to, because I have a plan. She frowned, curious. What kind of plan? He leaned in slightly and smiled. I want to open a restaurant, and I want you to manage it. Sophie was in shock for a few seconds. What? She asked, unable to believe what she had just heard. Mbappé smiled. You heard me right. I want to open a restaurant and I want you to manage it. Sophie laughed nervously. That's crazy. You're a football player. Why would you open a restaurant? He shrugged. I've always wanted to invest in something outside of football, and I'm interested in gastronomy, but what really motivated me was the way you treated me. She was still trying to process everything. But I don't know how to run a restaurant. I'm just a waitress. You're not just a waitress, Mbappé interrupted. You have something many places lack, empathy, and that's essential for a great restaurant. The rest you can learn. Sophie hesitated. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but it seemed surreal. I don't even know what to say. Say yes, he replied, laughing. She smiled, feeling a mix of fear and excitement. And where would this restaurant be? Mbappé leaned back in his chair, pleased that she was starting to consider the idea. I already have a place in mind. Want to see it? Sophie still didn't know if she was dreaming, but she nodded. 2 weeks later, Sophie stood in front of an old, closed-down bistro in a charming neighborhood of Marseille. The facade needed some renovations, but she could see the potential. What do you think? Mbappé asked, his eyes shining with excitement. Sophie smiled. I think it could become something incredible. He clapped his hands together. Then let's get started. Mbappé spared no effort. He hired architects, designers, and renowned chefs to renovate the space and create a special menu. But he made sure Sophie was involved in every decision. She helped choose the restaurant's name, the decor style, and even participated in food tastings. Over time, Sophie realized she had a natural talent for management. She learned about business operations, customer service, and even wine selection. She was no longer just a waitress. Now, she was a true restaurant manager. The restaurant was named Le Cœur de Sophie, Sophie's heart. On opening night, a long line formed outside. The media was there, of course. After all, a restaurant opened by Mbappé was big news. But the football star made one thing clear. This restaurant is about Sophie. She is the heart of this place. Sophie was deeply moved by his words, and as the doors opened, She welcomed the customers with the same warm smile she had always had. The restaurant was an instant success. It quickly became one of the most popular spots in the city, not just for its delicious food but also for its welcoming atmosphere. A few months later, Sophie was walking through the dining area, making sure everything was running smoothly, when she saw someone enter. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Mr. Laurent, her former manager from Le Petit Paris. He looked around, visibly impressed by the restaurant's elegance, then turned to Sophie, hesitant. She walked up to him and, in a polite but firm tone, asked, "Can I help you?" Laurent cleared his throat. "I heard about the restaurant and wanted to see it for myself." Sophie kept her gaze steady without resentment. "I hope you enjoy your experience here," she said with no sarcasm, but with the dignity of someone who had overcome the past. She turned and went back to work, feeling stronger than ever. Across the room, Mbappé watched her and smiled. Sophie hadn't just gained a restaurant. She had earned the respect and recognition she had always deserved. And most importantly, she had done it by staying true to who she had always been.